Welcome into the Otson Audibles podcast. I'm at Prehm, Erik Skopil, Jared Mack on this Friday, April 14th edition of the show. And we're going to talk spring football because, hey, we just came from practice yesterday, Thursday. They will hold their first scrimmage on Saturday. We get Dan Lanning Saturday afternoon. After that scrimmage, we'll learn a lot about his first impressions of that scrimmage. We probably won't learn that much because Dan's always, I got a review. We'll see. But Thursday, we got the first opportunity to see not only 11 offensive players or 11 defensive players on the field at one time during practice this spring, guys. We saw them together on the field, 11 on 11. Very insightful. Peek into just kind of what spring football is like for both sides of the football when they went 11 on 11 and they went, we're not going to call them first team, second team, third team, because we've been told, guys, these are just groups. I think it was like green team, yellow team, white team.
Yeah.
But 3 different groups went out there. We can take our assumptions. We can take that information, how we want to digest it. I think all 3 of us are in agreement. There's pretty telling groupings out there.
Fastball's back is what that means. So fastball is the 11-11 period that Matt's referring to. The aim being basically to get as many plays in as possible. Like the goal is to get everyone lined up as quick as possible. That's like the aim of this fastball period. That's not to say they're trying to not trying to succeed, but they're just with the play. But the goal is basically just get everybody lined up as quick as possible and practice that. So five different plays for each of the groups. We can get into if we want to at some point, like some of what we actually saw. But I think that's probably less interesting to me than in terms of what I guess we kind of have a sort of a hierarchy of a 2 deep, if you will. I know, as Matt said, this is being described as just random groups. I think that's probably not totally accurate, but at the same
100%.
time, and what I wanted to start by doing is this is the first fastball of spring, and I went and looked at the first fastball of last spring, and you get a sense of this is just kind of a snapshot of where things are, and this might not mean a ton come fall. It is just kind of the way I wanted to start. And I think that's probably pretty obvious, but just I thought it was fun looking back at a year ago, last year's first day of fastball, which happens to be day 7 of spring. So maybe we're on to something here, guys. Maybe we just block that away for next year. 7th day, we're going to get our fastball. But a year ago, Byron Cardwell was the first team running back. Stephen Jones was at left tackle. TJ Bass was at right guard. Suava Poti, who never played a snap last year, was one of the first team interior defensive linemen. What else do we have here? The starting safeties were Brian Addison and Triquez Bridges, who never started a game at safety last year. So I read all this not to discount what we're about to share, but just to prove that this is just kind of a snapshot in time. There's still numerous months away, obviously, until we get to game 1. But what we did see, I think, on Thursday was an idea of kind of where things are right now. So do we want to just run through the lists, or how do we want to approach kind of breaking this down, guys?
I figured we would break it down by team.
Okay.
Talk about the first team, then kind of run through that, then go second and third.
Okay. So should I just read off the first team offense and defense, and then we can kind of have some reactions?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Does that work? Okay. First team offense, what we saw, we had Bo Nix at quarterback. No shock there. Running back, Noah Whittington. X receiver, Troy Franklin. Z receiver, Chris Hudson. Slot, Tez Johnson. So they're playing those guys together. Interesting. Tight end, Patrick Herbert. We should note Terrence Ferguson was absent for the part of practice we watched. We did see him leaving the facility later, so I don't think there's anything serious to worry about there. But that explains why he wasn't with the first team. And then the offensive line is kind of what we'd been projecting it might look like, which was Josh Connerly at left tackle, Marcus Harper left guard, Jackson Powers Johnson center, Stephen Jones right guard, and Johnny Cornelius right tackle. Defensive line, we had Mace, and I believe he was standing, right, Jared?
Mm-hmm.
Casey Rogers, Taki Taimani, Brendan Dorless with the hand down. Linebacker, we had Bassa, we had Brown. Don't think that's a huge surprise. Corner, we had Triquez Bridges, and then I thought this was a little bit interesting, Jaleel Florence with the first group. And then safety, J.J. Greenfield, Evan Williams, and Tyshim Johnson. So there's a rundown of the first team or first offensive group. I believe it was the yellow group, and the first defensive group, which I believe was also referred to as yellow. I thought that was what he said when he got to, like, everybody organized. Yellow, yellow. So there's the groups. I know we're not calling them first teams. I think I did refer to it. So I apologize to Nate Kruger, Dan Lanning, everybody at Oregon for breaking the rule of referring to it as a first team. That was Team Yellow. Jared, what stood out most to you running through all of that? I know you were kind of eyes on defense. I guess while you were watching that develop, was there anything that really kind of caught your eye, or was it most of this expected, or kind of what you thought it would look like?
Well, honestly, I was surprised that we were even able to watch fastball portions because that's just kind of how practice has gone for the last year under Dan. Thank you, Dan, for coming on the podcast. No, I don't think a lot of things caught my attention. I think we talked about this afterwards. And Eric, you did a good job of going through what we saw last season in terms of the first fastball period and what spring practice looks like. You just kind of take note of everything and you say, that's interesting. But on the flip side, Jordan Birch was a guy who was limited in practice yesterday, so he didn't take part in the 11-on-11 portion. Kyrie Jackson was a guy we didn't see yesterday at practice, so he's a guy who obviously was not going to take part in this portion of the practice. So that's probably why you have Jaleel Florence as the first team cornerback. Keith Brown and Jeffrey Bassa. We'll get to who are the second and third team linebackers eventually, but again, this is spring football. This is just their 7th day, so I'm not taking too much away from it. I think it's interesting. I think some of the names in this first team are who I would expect to be there. But there are also guys like Keith Brown, like JJ Greenfield, like Jaleel Florence, who are guys that, or Mace Fooney even, where come September 2nd or 3rd or whatever the first day of the season is, like, I don't know if I would expect to see them there, but it was just fun, I think, overall, just to watch them line up and, run a play or two, even though they weren't any good plays.
I was interested that JPJ got the first rep at center. I thought that was notable. Because he's the expected guy that I think we would all assume would be at that center position. But it's not necessarily gone that way when we've seen reps with the offensive line go, previous practices. And like that goes to what, Erik said, what I said ahead of this is that there's some things to take away from this and some things that there's not. I don't think there's anything to read into Noah Winnington being over Bucky. I think that's basically 1A and 1B. They're both going to play a lot. Mm-hmm. I don't have any concern over that at all. I did think it was interesting that we saw Hudson and Tez on the field at the same time. We've been debating a lot, like, who's going to play in the slot. And the first time we see it, they both come out on the first offense that goes out there together on the field.
Yeah, that was one of the more notable elements of this. How about quarterback? We kind of skipped over that. Bo Nix first team or first group. Sorry, was that? I mean, I wasn't sure.
Is that shocking?
I wasn't sure what we'd see there. I'm just kidding. I mean, but it is, by the way, refreshing not to go through a spring with some sort of competition at quarterback and just kind of know what it is, especially the last 2 or 3 years where there was a competition that really didn't feel like a competition. But I digress. I think you're right. The receiver thing offensively was the part that probably stood out to me, just that they played both of them together. I think we mentioned before that would be a possibility. Chris had in the past played some outside receiver. So I'm not stunned that he's the one out there. I think Tez probably as an outside receiver at Z, especially, that would be tough for him just with his physical limitations. Not that either of them are huge people, but Tez in particular is pretty small. I think we might see that group quite a bit this year during the season, theoretically, depending on what happens with Gary Bryant Jr., with Trayshawn Holden, and Jurgon Dickey. So I think I'm ready to move on, unless there's anything else from the first team you keep saying first team from Yellow team from Group Yellow. Group Yellow. Is there anything else from Group Yellow we want to discuss, or do you want to move on to? I believe it was Group Green was the second group of teams we saw.
No, I'm good. Move on.
Ty Thompson, quarterback, running back Bucky Irving, X receiver Kyler Casper, Z receiver Trayshawn Holden, slot receiver Von Reams, tight end Kenyon Sadiq, left tackle Feope Lalu, left guard Dave Iuli, center Charlie Pickard, right guard Kavika Rogers, right tackle George Silva. I'm going to go on to the defense here. Amarian Winston, kind of cool to see a young player like that up with not the second team, but with Green Group. Keon Ware Hudson, Ben Roberts, Jake Shipley. Roberts, another young guy up there with Green Group. Linebackers, Connor Sewell, Jamal Hill. That's another one probably we can kind of discuss in a moment here. And then at corner, Dante Manning and Cole Martin and Darren Barkins were all out in the field. Do we have it? I don't know if we have it. Do we ever clarify who was kind of nickel, who was outside with those two, with that group?
No.
Okay.
I thought it was Cole because we have photos of him pretty close up to the line of scrimmage in the slot, but it's just a couple photos.
It would make sense.
His body would make sense to be playing there just in terms of being a slot, like a traditional slot corner. So that would add up more than the other two, but kind of notable Cole Martin with that Green Group. And then at safety, Steve Stevens, Brian Addison, kind of the returning almost starter group or the returners with the most experience almost at those positions from last year. So probably offensively, a couple things that stood out to me, but I'll go to Jared for what defensively were the things that kind of, I don't know. I don't want to make it sound like, oh man, this was like, earth shattering news, but like, what were the things that as you were marking it down kind of made you go, huh, that's sort of interesting.
Yeah, I mean, when the second group went on the field, it was definitely the three cornerbacks were the most interesting. Oregon implemented a nickel set last season against Arizona, against Jacob Cowing and the Dorian Singer. They moved Christian Gonzalez inside to nickel for nickel cornerback. Mm-hmm. And I think it's interesting that they're already kind of displaying that. Cole Martin getting the job, I guess, in this second group is interesting too, since he's the true freshman. But again, this is an early enrollee. This is a guy who's been around the playbook, who's been able to learn it. This is also Demetrius Martin's son, so he's a bright kid. He knows football. He understands it pretty well. Although he might be undersized, he's certainly physically he looks the profile, and he's certainly going to play fundamentally sound football. But I think the main takeaways for me, other than the cornerbacks, were the linebacking group: Connor Sewell and Jamal Hill. Jamal Hill is probably a linebacker. I don't know. We'll see. Everybody has positional flexibility, positional versatility, and that it is a pure example on this second group here, this second defensive group, and so that's an interesting group. I think Connor Sewell is a bigger guy than we originally anticipated, meaning physically bigger. I don't know what his role will be in terms of that being bigger or not, but physically a bigger dude. I think at Arizona State he was much more of a tweener, much more of a kind of like a hybrid safety, what Jeffrey Bassa was in his first season, where he's like, oh, Jeffrey, you're kind of a big dude. Here, go play linebacker. Sewell is now a guy who not only does he wear number 42 like Jackson the Duke, but he's beginning to resemble him physically at a linebacker position. And then, Amarian Winston as the edge rusher, as the guy who was standing up on the defensive line, I thought was something to take note of. But really, Anthony Jones wasn't practice, or he wasn't participating in this group. So he's a guy, Anthony Jones is a guy we've heard a lot of good things about, and I would expect him to be a second team guy second team when the season comes, but I would expect him to see him in the second group more often than not this spring, just because of his positional versatility, just because of his skill set. But yeah, and then Brian Addison and Steve Stevens at safety. I think that makes a lot of sense, even though there is no hierarchy in these groups. But this one, as a second group, makes a lot of sense.
Matt?
Yeah, I just there's not really anything here that overly surprises me outside of what we talked about with the first group. I like the fact that the secondary has some experience: Dante Manning, Jamal Hill, even though he's at linebacker, Steve Stevens and Brian Addison, paired up with two young corners. Darren Barkins is a redshirt freshman, or a redshirt sophomore now. Yeah. Cole Martin is a true freshman. Keon Ware Hudson, Jake Shipley, very experienced guys within the program. Ware Hudson, obviously more than the other ones, paired with two young guys, Winston and Roberts. And this kind of goes in line with what Erik Skopil, the offensive line coach, I'm talking defense here, but right, he talked about this, later on that day, where he was saying, hey, we've got some veteran guys next up, right next to a guy who maybe hasn't played a snap before in a football game. And if he's got any kind of questions, he can lean over and they can figure it out real quick to make sure he's on par. I think that's reflective on both sides of the football, offensively and defensively, with these second groups. There's some guys that are going to play a ton. Offensively, you look at Bucky Irving, you look at Trayshawn Holden. The offensive line maybe doesn't have many of these guys, but they're around young players. I think that the biggest takeaway from the offensive group is how low the numbers are right now at scholarship at receiver, because Ashton Kozart is in the third group. He's a true freshman, a wide receiver, a scholarship wide receiver. And it's totally understandable that Ashton Kozart is on the third team. He's a newcomer. He's going to get thrown into the fire and work his way up. It's shocking that they don't have another scholarship player to put into the slot where Von Reams is currently at right now. It's shocking that Terrence Ferguson didn't practice while we were out there, so we should make that note. That's why Patrick Herbert was probably with the ones. It's probably why Kenyon Sadiq was with the twos. But there's not a scholarship tight end with the third offense. There's a true freshman at tight end with the second offense. There's a walk-on with one of the receivers, and one of the other receivers, Kyle Casper, hardly played last season as a true freshman and redshirted last year. That showed us how thin right now the numbers are at receiver.
Yeah, and it's going to get better, right? I mean, I think that's the point and this is why it's just kind of a snapshot of in time. But yeah, you look at the numbers at receiver. There's like six scholarship receivers who are available to at least be in these drills right now. So that part's telling. I kind of wanted to go back to the Jamal Hill of it all because I just think that's a really, I don't want to say it's an under the radar part because it's a pretty recognizable player, but playing at a early significant position change at a position where they could really use some help. And Matt, I know you asked Jamal after practice about his weight gain, and he said he was doing 300 push-ups per day, something like that.
He said, I said, okay, what's the solution?
We won't get to hear it.
I don't know what the end of the story is. Shoot, Matt cut out. That's too bad. We'll wait to hear everybody on bated breath for the Jamal Hill explanation. Matt will, when he comes back, we'll let him finish that story. But I just thought Jamal Hill, that's a guy who I think when we get to watch more, because again, there aren't a lot of takeaways from these 15 plays, from actual results perspective. I don't think that's the part that's important. And I didn't even really get to follow how Jamal looked in terms of playing at this position. But I think adding a player, and I'm saying adding to this position group, who has the experience, that has the athleticism, who has the tackling acumen. Again, he was the highest rated PFF tackler on Oregon's team last year. I just think it's a pretty notable addition, and I'll be very curious to see how he kind of factors into it. All right, we missed you cut out right at the beginning of the Jamal Hill. What did Jamal Hill tell you? Because nobody knows the story yet.
I just joked with him because he tweeted out photos of this, I think yesterday or maybe this morning, how big he's gotten, and so we've all noticed it. So I went up to him just all right, what's your secret? How did you do this? Kind of jokingly, hey, teach me your ways. And his solution was basically he just spent however long it took for him to do this, 300 push-ups a day, basically all off season. I hope it's not in one run, because that would you would tear a pectoral doing that. That's just crazy. But 300 push-ups, that takes a long time to do. I mean, I understand he probably can crank them out pretty fast, but still, even that, that's a lot of push-ups.
Mm-hmm.
We're gonna have to ask a follow-up on that. I do want to know if he does those. Is that one set, or is he doing those in groups of 100 or groups of 50, something? I don't know, because 300 consecutive that's a lot of push-ups, man. That's a good number, and he is, of course, already well put together. But as you said, I'd love to have heights and weights. I would imagine he's probably pushing 220, which is impressive considering. I think, what did we say he was listed at? 207.
I think he would be even more.
He could be even more, but I mean, last year didn't we say he was listed at
I'll-
207 or 211 or
I'll
something
check.
last year? I didn't want to come out and say hey, we might be pushing 230 because I don't want to suggest he's gained 20 pounds.
He might
he
be.
might-
It was
he might have.
212 last year.
212. Okay, so yeah, maybe it's fair to say he's
I
pushing
mean-
225, 230. I mean, I didn't want to come out without knowing and say like he's gained 20 pounds. I
I
just thought
understand.
that was a big jump. But
Well, I don't
it's a
think it's
noticeable
even that
gain.
big of a jump because he's a big boy now. He's significantly bigger than he was last season. I mean, obviously, we haven't really seen him be a full-time linebacker other than these five drills, which most of it are us spent writing down who the heck is playing. So we don't really get to see that. We do get to see the drills, but we don't really pay attention to what's going on during them. But again, a guy with his pedigree as a safety, with his ability to cover, with his ability to hit, it makes natural sense to move him to linebacker, especially with his frame. He's always been a bigger safety. He's always been around that 210 to 215 range. I'm sure he fluctuates there, which is, again, that's bigger for a safety. He's a broad body as well, broad shoulders. With this added weight, it would not surprise me at all if he's in the 230 range, like 232 as like a max. He's big. I mean, he's significantly bigger than Jeffrey Bassa, and we've all kind of gawked about how big Jeffrey Bassa is this spring.
Yeah.
So, and Bassa, I don't remember what he was last season. I could quickly look it up, but I'm just going to randomly guess. He was probably in the 220s. And
Sorry, not to interrupt, but I think we looked it up, and I think didn't we say he and Hill were pretty close, like maybe within 5 pounds. I don't think he was 220 last year. I want to say it was like a similar weight to Hill. I thought we looked up.
yeah, it wouldn't surprise me. I'll quickly look it up as I'm doing this on the fly. 212. So there you go. Similar, very like the exact same weight as Jeffrey Bassa was last season. And Jamal looks significantly bigger than Jeffrey. And that's no I don't know. That's not saying it's that Jeff hasn't added weight, because he clearly has, and it's no knock at Jeff. But I just think that Jamal is a much bigger frame, and I think he carries the weight better. So I'll be interested to see where Jamal goes in terms of these groupings over the course of spring football. But to see him already second team is notable. I'm excited to see what he looks like on the field.
The only other thing on second team that I wanted to touch on was just the offensive line. I think Matt did a good job of outlining the lack of depth at receiver right now. And I think, just to be clear, I think we all expect it to be totally fine by the time we get to fall. There's a possibility to add Gary Bryant Jr. We talked about that. They've got a couple of, they have Jaren Dickey returning. Justice Lowe's been banged up this spring. Josh Delgado's been banged up this spring. Those are two guys who would probably factor into the slot receiver position where Von Reams was with the second group. So I think they'll be fine there. But the depth on the offensive line, I thought, stood out here, where like just the size and athleticism. And I know these guys don't have a lot of playing experience here, but the size and athletic, just of Feope and Iuli and Kavika and Silva, like those are all clearly Division I offensive line athletes. Like just watching them move around, like I think Feope quietly has been one of the bigger stories of the offseason in terms of just getting to be more athletic. Like I was watching him on I can't remember if it was Thursday or Tuesday, one of these last couple of practices, just watching him working on getting off of the snap. And he is so much more explosive and quick than he was in the past. So I'm encouraged by him. But yeah, I just think that second group, again, none of those guys have really played here. But I just think from a depth perspective, like those are big athletic guys across the board that I think you should feel decent about. And we also have to note that Junior Angelout was not part of this, and so he'll factor into the first team, second team group in some way, and all that. So, but yeah, let's move on to the third group. Which
I had one more thing. Mateo Uyunglele did not participate in these 11-on-11 portions. So, I mean, I'm jumping the gun here, but you will not hear his name called in the third grouping. You didn't hear his name called in the second or the first grouping, but he did not participate. And this was the same thing as it was last year during the spring, where guys that we may have projected to start, may have projected to be second team, just didn't participate for whatever reason on some of these fastball portions. So that's a guy who I neglected to mention, along with Anthony Jones, Tony Jones, as the guys who should be in that second grouping as an edge rusher. But just something I thought everybody should know.
It's important to do that, I think. So just almost as a general practice here, if there's a player that you expected would be with like the first or second team who's not with any of the teams, that's not Most likely not because they're like really in the doghouse. It's probably because they're being protective. Like you'll notice that a lot of the more experienced, not a lot, but a few of the more experienced defensive linemen, like Popo, who's coming off an injury, didn't take part in any of these teams. Like there are guys here who you maybe would project to be competing for starting roles that like a not a Mateo as a starter, but a guy who's competing for reps who just weren't out there. So I wouldn't look too deep into those. The players aren't involved in these groups for a variety of reasons. So I don't think it necessarily means like. And again, as we said earlier, these groups are very early snapshots, and I wouldn't be like, oh man, Mateo's fallen behind. That's not at all what this represents. At least I don't think we think it is. All right.
Real quick, this could very well be a precursor to, hey, we feel like the guys that maybe didn't participate, we're very confident in their roles, and we want to see that play out in the scrimmage on Saturday. And maybe this is a putting, some guys in different groups or what have you, because we've been told these aren't first and second and third team depth charts.
Right.
And just seeing how they react ahead of the scrimmage together. And then it's, hey, yeah, we like that. Let's put them in the scrimmage together. Let's do it in a live game situation like that. Could be a theory of why we didn't see certain guys.
And Matt also notes there that Saturday will be for the first scrimmage. I think we made note of that on an earlier pod this week, but there will be some scrimmage recap news on Saturday after. We'll see how much and how forthcoming Dan wants to be with what actually takes place there. But yeah, expect to see some scrimmage information as best we can on Saturday afternoon sometime. All right, third group, quarterback by Austin Novosad, running back Dante Dowdell. And now we talk about the depth at receiver. This is where it got really, really light because you've got Darian Anderson, a walk-on as the X. You had Ashton Kozart, who Matt mentioned earlier, as the Z. And then walk-on running back Preston Alford, we think was the slot receiver. And I only say we think because I'm pretty sure because it was a number 28 out there. But I only say because, hey, we have never seen this guy work at receiver. And there he was out at receiver. Tight end was Landon Shepard. Offensive line from left to right, Michael Wooten, Poncho Lalalu, Cannon Rossi, Ty Delgado, and Bailey Jaramillo. Third team defense, I think this was the white defense. Johnny Bowens, Mikhail Gardner, Tavita Pame, Tatum Toyota. There's 4 true freshmen along the line there. Kind of fun to see those guys together. Linebacker, Justin Jacobs, Devin Jackson. Corner, Jaleel Tucker, Solomon Davis. And then at safety, we had a couple of newcomers in Cody DeCambra, Tyler Turner, along with Kamari Terrell, who was a second-year player who I think most of us are pretty high on. The depth here is going to be pushed, and I think the thing that shows here, and of course you have to consider injuries, and as we just discussed, some players like a Mateo or a Popo aren't taking part here, but you do see where Oregon has more scholarship depth because on defense, those are all scholarship players, and almost all of them are first or second year players. In fact, yeah, I think all of them with the exception of Justine Jacobs, who was a third-year player coming from Iowa. I think that's right. Third, did he play 2 years or fourth? He played 3. The redshirt, is that what it was?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep.
So, but the other 10 are all true freshmen, redshirt freshmen. Kamara, I guess, is a sophomore. But you look at the offense there, and a lot of the names I read you probably don't know because they are walk-ons, and sort of shows some of the depth there. I mentioned the quality of that, I thought, from an athlete perspective along the offensive line. Well, you get to the third team here, and you've got 2 scholarship guys on the left side, and Wooten and Iapani, and then the rest of it is walk-ons. And then you look at the receiver situation. I think it's pretty notable, and I wouldn't be too concerned here because again, there's plenty of time for this to get rectified. And as we said before, a lot of guys are dinged up and not taking part, but never great, I guess, when you look out there and go, oh, there's a couple of guys I didn't even know were playing those positions. You were out with those groups. So, but I'm not like sitting here being concerned to that point, really.
Yeah, I don't think it's concerning either. Again, it kind of goes back to my original point where it's like, what are the overall takeaways? It's like, oh, well, it's the first time we saw everybody kind of line up in spring. So There's still plenty of time to go before the season. There's still plenty of time before a couple other early enrollees in general get to Oregon. There's still the spring transfer portal portion of the season, so that should be a fun, good time had by all. The third group defense, not a lot of takeaways here. Justin Jacobs was that third group linebacker along with Devin Jackson. And that goes to Eric's point where, Popo Amavai isn't in any of these groups. Guy coming off of a major injury. I think it's similar to Justin. I think that's a guy who, coming off a season-ending injury last season in Iowa, comes back, Maybe he's 100%. Maybe he's 85%. Maybe they just want to see him get reps out there. And that's probably why he's with the third group. I think that this is going to be a good competition, though. Was a little surprising to see him line up with the third group rather than the first or second. I think that when he gets healthy, 100% healthy, this is a guy who's going to compete for a starting job, whether it be alongside Bassa, for Bassa, alongside Brown, or for Brown, or whoever it is that Tosh Lupoy and Dan Lanning come up with as a starting linebacker. I think he's going to be in there. Other than that, yeah, it's just kind of cool to see an all-freshman defensive line. Tatum Tuiota gets the edge there. Kamari Terrell, like Eric said, a guy we're all kind of high on. I'm sure he's a guy who could work his way up, but whether that be a cornerback or safety, I think that's yet to be known. It's a guy who played both last season. Like Troyquez Bridges, seems to be doing both this season. Someone to certainly keep an eye for. But yeah, not a whole lot of takeaways. It's the third group of the first day of spring ball, or the first 11-on-11 portion of spring ball.
I think it just shows to the credit, or not the credit, but the statement that Dan Lanning made. I think it was Tuesday when he said Oregon has more depth defensively than they do offensively. And I think that was in regards to the offense and defensive lines, if I recall correctly. But I think that comment can be just said about both units entirely. Is there's just more bodies that are on scholarship right now on roster defensively than there are offensively. We've got multiple walk-ons, I think, with that second unit on the offensive side of the football, or true freshmen, or actually both. Charlie Pickard, Von Reams, and then a true freshman, Kenyon Sadiq. We also have George Silva, who's a newcomer as well, with that second unit offensively. And then you look at the third unit, and there are a lot of walk-ons mixed into that group, while defensively there aren't. I don't think there's a single one now that I'm looking it over again.
Not.
Yeah, there's not a single walk-on. Now there is on the second team defense, but that's because or what's the first group? Yeah, first group, JJ Greenfield. But he's not really a scholarship guy. Your normal scholarship player, because
he's not really a walk-on guy either.
Yeah.
James made a good point of like, I'd love to talk to JJ about his story, because it seems like it's
going on here.
One of the weirder ones where he was a scholarship guy, he disappeared for a year, he came back, he's not on scholarship, and now he's with the Ones. Like, it's kind of a wild run.
He played last year, albeit sparingly, but that's a guy who, I don't know, that would get reps over other true freshmen from a top 10 class for Dan last season, or top 15, I should say. So yeah, it's he's a dude. I think he's a legitimate guy who could come in at that nickel safety position. But continue, Matt.
That was basically it. Is there's more depth defensively right now than there is offensively. And I mean, you guys brought up the portal open Saturday. Like, I have a hard time seeing if they do add people to the portal, which means even more players would have to leave. There's a focus that probably starts offensively than defensively. And that's not to say that there's holes that can't be filled defensively, but there's greater holes, I think, offensively, and they need the depth if they're going to add portal players.
I think,
and some of that also gets solved with freshmen showing up in June.
I was going to say, I think Thursday illustrated the tight end problem pretty clearly, and it was a problem that we discussed for a long time. Of just like, if you take Terrence Ferguson out of the equation, you've got Patrick Herbert as your first team tight end and Kenyon Sadiq as your second. And as I think Jared was the first to bring it up, we've kind of all been in agreement for a while here since there was three players who were on scholarship at the position last year took off this offseason. They just don't have the bodies, and that's a position, to Matt's point about the portal coming up, that like I just think is imperative to find some help with. They've added a couple of walk-on guys, like one of which I'm going to forget his first name, but last name is Brashears. Like, he's like a Division I. I think it's Travis.
Travis Brashears.
He's like a Division I body at tight end. I have no idea how
he's the next Tyler Naney.
But he's like 6'6", 250 probably. I don't know. He could be bigger than that for all I know. And so like they added some size and some big walk-ons, but like these aren't scholarship players for a reason. So like they need to go find some help there. But we've kind of talked about some of the other positions. I just thought tight end in particular, with Terrence not there for the day, it was kind of like, wow, they do not have depth. And the only reason it's also important is like there's no Duran Dickey early enrollee coming in, in a month or so. There's no help. Like there's no help on the way. So I think they need to go find a guy there.
Just so you know, it's Travis Brashear.
Mm-hmm.
You're correct in the first name. I'm pulling up his huddle, and this feels wrong because it's from 2019, but he went to University High School, and he's listed at quarterback on his huddle page.
I think he went to he played college ball somewhere else. We're doing this live on the podcast, investigating this walk-on tight end. I'm pretty sure he's not a freshman, is he? I think he's like a junior on the roster.
He's a freshman.
He is?
He's a freshman.
Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe it was
he
Shepherd.
went to Lawndale High School.
Okay, so that's a different player than the one you were looking
at. That's a different player. Okay. I'm looking at this up because I want to know how big he is.
Anyway, but Brashear's is big body. But regardless, the tight end position, we've kind of like killed 2 minutes there, just like trying to figure out who this person is. So if you want to figure that out, maybe chime in later.
Let's take a quick break, or unless we have anything else left to do.
The only thing I wanted to say was, like, if people had any questions of what we actually got to watch from results on the field perspective, the only thing that I thought was somewhat noteworthy really was just that there were some center to quarterback exchange issues, i.e. the centers had a hard time snapping the football consistently to the quarterbacks. And that's a thing that you really need to get worked out. And this might transition to something we talk about after the break about Erik Terry and some of the things he talked about with the offensive line, the center position in particular. But I just thought that was something to take away from. Not a huge thing by any means that, hey, day one, you're having snap problems, like with two guys who none of these guys have really played the position in games, but something to kind of just keep an eye on, I think.
Yeah. And I got one more thing as well.
Yeah.
I do this often during the spring game, where you have to kind of remind yourself that all of these guys on the field that are playing against each other are all on the same team. It's I know it may sound really stupid and really like rudimentary, like excuse my French, but no shit, Jared. Of course they're on the same team. But when you look at each individual team, you look at how they are as a group, or you look at each individual defensive grouping and say, well, they're kind of struggling here. There's not a lot of guys there. I do think like the wide receiver position and the tight end depth needs to be addressed either during the portal, or I don't know how else it would be. But so yeah, during the portal season. But you're going to get all these guys on the same team, on the same field together at one point. So the depth is going to look better just from a fundamental standpoint when you're like, oh yeah, there's 3 wide receivers you can play on the field at the same time, and then they have like 6 behind them. It's still not enough, but it's better than you're like, oh shoot, like after 6 guys and you're getting into the walk-ons, you're getting to the real weeds of the program there. It will look better on paper and during an actual game. But until then, it won't look great when you get into that third team and you see the lack of depth offensively, or maybe just a lack of talent around a specific position group. But these players, they all play for Oregon. It will be much different when they are all on one sideline and not on 2. But I like to bring that up because for some reason that always it fails to click in my brain for a while until I get to the spring game and say, oh, all these talented guys, wow, shoot, they're on the same team. That's great. Love that.
This is good for Oregon. They all play here.
Yeah, this is great. They should do this more often. Yeah.
All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll discuss some of the comments and insight we learned from offensive line coach Erik Terry. All right, welcome back to the Odds and Audibles podcast. I'm Matt Prehm, Erik Skopil, Jared Mack. Guys, Erik Terry spoke, and I have to say, like, the best interviews on the team, typically, I feel like the last, 15 years I've done this, have started with the offensive line. There's certainly guys that are at the top, but if you're going to pick a position group that are consistently year in, year out are the best interviews, I think the offensive line's up there. And Erik Terry, the offensive line coach, first time talking to him in a long time, maybe ever. And I came away very impressed. Dude he knows how to praise his players at the same time, not overhyping them, which sometimes can be the case with younger coaches.
Right.
And he was very. I came away very impressed with that conversation. Erik did a transcript of it, of his interview. I think it was almost 15 minutes long. We've got the whole video up as well on duckterritory.com. And he has the unique background of he recruited some of these guys to Oregon, or was in the process of helping get these guys to Oregon, then left to go to the NFL. Or I think he had to stop at a college spot before that. But
Hawaii, I believe.
Yes, he went to Hawaii and then went to the NFL, and now has come back to Oregon. And it was just a very insightful interview. We learned about what his traits are. He's looking for linemen. We learned some insight into Josh Connerly. We learned some insight into the center position. Quite honestly, we're at 40 minutes of this podcast. We could spend an entire show, I think, breaking down this interview if we really wanted to. It was that informative.
Yeah, it was the longest I think I've spent transcribing one of these. It took me about 90 minutes because not only did it go for, as Matt said, like 15 minutes, maybe, I think it was like 12 or 15, but it also went into some really deep technical terminology because he went there. And that means I have to listen a little more closely because I want to make sure I get the words right because I might not have heard of that particular term or phrase before. But like as Matt said, yeah, super impressive guy. Again, I think you have to remind yourself with some of these coaches, like, a lot of the coaches we deal with now, I'm older than, which is still something I'm getting used to. And this is the youngest, I think, position coach I've probably ever interviewed because he's 27 years old. That's a young guy. And to Matt's point, like super personable. I think we mentioned Will Stein when he introduced himself the other day, came around, shook everybody's hands. Alik was the same way, came up and dapped everybody up, introduced himself. And to Matt's point, I think a lot of interesting information was kind of shared in terms of what he's looking for. I think if you want to get back to the technical thing here, I don't know if this is the most interesting thing, but it was something I know was a question for some because this is a guy who had worked with Mario Cristobal and Alex Mirabal, had spent some time at other places, had obviously played his college career at Wake Forest. But he said what he will be using from a technique perspective primarily will be a similar technique to what you saw under Mario and Alex Mirabal, which is a double under technique. It's talking about where your hands are placed. So just be aware. I don't know if that really matters too much unless you're sitting here like really dialed into offensive line play. But this will be a closer approach to what you saw under, because Clem came in and I think switched to kind of a different, tighter hand placement in terms of where you're making contact.
Inside hands, right?
Yeah, inside hands. So I heard inside hands and tight hands. So I'm trying to make sure I'm representing it correctly from a leak. But yeah, a little different. So I think you're going to see a little bit of a shift there. But yeah, no, I think in general it was interesting to pick his brain. And another part I thought he said, which again goes into what we were just running through a moment ago, because yeah, Matt asked about Harper at center. I asked about what Stephen Jones and a Johnny Cornelius combination, why that was a good kind of pairing. And to both, he kind of said, "Hey, we're cross training guys. We're just mixing and matching. We're trying to figure out what works best." So there's very much that sort of a mindset at play here, but also acknowledge like he thinks like Marcus Harper's shown some really nice moments at center, and he thinks that right side of the offensive line works well because those are a couple of really big athletic guys. So they might be mixing and matching, but that doesn't necessarily mean they don't land upon the right combinations by doing so. So nothing is obviously set in stone, but he made it pretty clear that there's kind of a lot to like, but some of the current setups in spring, even though a lot of that is subject to change later.
Not surprised he's saying that there's a lot to like, because I agree. I think there is a lot to like. I did not interview Alik Terry. I was over interviewing Triquez Bridges, and we had a wonderful exchange over there. But upon further review of the transcript, like Erik said, I thought it was one of the biggest things that stood out to me was his desire for position flexibility, positional versatility, however you want to describe it. That's a thing that it's kind of strange. I feel like 7 years ago it wasn't really much of a thing, but now it's like everywhere, and every coach wants to do it. And I don't know. It's all started with Mario and Alex Mirabal and their hockey line subs for all their offensive linemen, which I don't. Did anybody ask about that yesterday?
No, but I kind of wish I should. We feel like we should have now, but no, we don't.
I can't anticipate that happening again. I don't know. I've never seen it happen before, and I don't know if I'll ever see it happen again. Yes, Eric.
Here's a question. Did Mario carry that with him to Miami last year? Like, I actually don't know.
No,
Did Mario
it didn't look like it. Like he had a 6 or 7 guys who were the clear snap count leader. Because I went to go check on Jonathan Dennis and Logan Sagapulu.
Yeah.
And those guys were way behind in the total snap count, but there was like 6 or 7 guys who were clearly above the rest. So it doesn't seem like it. But anyways, the positional versatility on the offensive line is always big. And, the thing with Marcus Harper and Jackson Powers Johnson is both those guys can play center. I know that Jackson Powers Johnson was brought here to be like the center of the future, but he's a guy who stepped in and played both guard positions last season. Marcus Harper is a guy who you would feel comfortable playing both guard positions. He's taken reps at center with Mario when Mario was the head coach here. He took reps at center during practice. He's a guy who has that positional versatility. Neither of them are physically great for a tackle spot, but hey, in a bind, in a pinch, I'm sure you could throw them out there and have some fun. But you have guys like George Silva. You have guys like Johnny Cornelius, Josh Connerly, Stephen Jones, even these guys who I'm sure that they would most likely rather keep at tackle, but have all had experience playing guard, have all have the ability to play guard. I think that's a really important thing for this offensive line. There's clearly certain guys you'd like to keep at a specific place, but teaching them, I think Alik mentioned Calvin Throckmorton as a guy who had the most positional versatility and had starts at every spot on the offensive line. I'm not sure they'll have that this year, but that was a huge selling point. That was a huge thing at Oregon during Throckmorton's final season. And it might not be as extreme this year because I think there are some guys who need to stay in specific spots, but it's going to be taught. And I think that's a huge thing for Oregon's O-line.
How many guys do you feel like out of Oregon we feel like should be cross-trained because they're good enough to do that? Not necessarily, hey, like these guys could do it, but how many feel like we think should do it? I think JPJ, Harper are the two for sure, guard and center between the two of them.
Mm-hmm. I think everybody but Josh Connerly, Johnny Cornelius, and George Silva.
Yeah, I was going to ask, does cross-train mean tackle guard, or are we talking right side, left side? Because if we're talking right side, left side, I think everybody should be trained to play.
I think it's legit 2 different positions. So I'm going to count left guard, right guard as the same position, even though it's different alignments. I get that, but tackle the guard, tackle the center, guard the center. I know there's 2 for sure, Harper and JPJ, because I think there's a good chance that both could be on the first team.
Could be.
We'll see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think Stephen Jones is maybe the only one at tackle that instantly pops in my head to say, yeah, he should go tackle guard.
And we should know that, like, they're doing, according to Elite, and of course we haven't seen this, they're doing that. And he called him Grizz, which took me a second. I don't know why I didn't. The nickname doesn't stick to me for some reason with Stephen Jones. I need to know why his nickname is Grizz, because I just didn't.
Because he's old. He's the oldest vet, Grizzly vet.
Grizzly vet. Is that what we're calling him? Okay, so he's Grizz. Okay,
that's what I mean. That would be my assumption.
That makes more sense than, like, I was like, is it something referencing the type of bear? Like, I don't.
6-year senior.
Yeah, adds up. But like, yeah, he did mention he's working at both guard and tackle. That makes sense. He's played there in his career. No, I don't think a lot. I mean, I Jared's point is a fair one in terms of the tackles. I think, like, how many times last year we talked about how few tackle bodies they have, and now they have a bunch of tackle bodies, and I'd like those tackle bodies to remain playing offensive tackles. Yeah, mm-hmm. So like, I'm in total agreement. I think I'd also include probably Michael Wooten would be a name, like, just because he's, I think, just a pretty clear tackle body. Yeah. He's so far down the depth chart that, like, we probably should be cross training him a little bit at this point, but like, he's someone who projects pretty clearly as a tackle. Like a Kaviko Rogers is already a guard tackle. Iapani is somebody who I've mentioned that he's playing both guard and center. So I think they're doing it with a lot of the guys already. But to Jared's point, I think, I think if you've got the offensive tackle bodies, which Oregon didn't really have the last couple of years. I'd like those guys to remain tackles, and I think Oregon legitimately has 4 or 5 guys that you look at and go like, those are like definitively offensive tackles, and it's kind of a nice situation to be in.
Who's the fifth guy?
I was probably including Michael Wooten in there just because I think
are you including Jones in there?
Let's run through the exercise to hold myself accountable. Silva, Connerly, Cornelius, Wooten. So yeah, 4 guys for sure, and I guess the 5th guy would maybe be Feope, but that's just because he is the backup left tackle right now. I like the way he's trimmed his body down. I would have told you in the past he was more guard because he was a little bit. I just didn't think he was explosive enough or athletic enough. But I think there's a shift there a little bit with Feope that I'm kind of encouraged by. So I'd include him in there, even though like I could see someone being like it would like he's more of a guard physically, but I think he's a humongous human being, and like some of those traits from that size are starting to come together in a way that like is kind of encouraging based upon me watching him literally get out of his stance and move and like push somebody holding a heavy bag. Like it's not like I'm seeing a ton here, but that would be the other guy to throw in there, I guess.
Let's talk Connerly for a second here. I thought so. Leak was around Panay, and I think are we all in agreement? Panay is by far the best tackle prospect, best lineman prospect to come through Oregon, at least in our careers of covering Oregon football.
I don't know who else it would be.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah. I'm trying to think of who a real strong competitor would be because he was a top pick and then has been a very good NFL player and it's also the school's only, I think, Outland Trophy winner. So
yeah,
that's probably hard to argue with.
So we're not saying outlandish things when Sewell is basically the best offensive lineman in modern football. Basically, let's just say the start of the 2000s. He didn't ever really compare him to Sewell, but he definitely threw out the, hey, if Josh Connerly continues to do what he's been doing, he's got the chance. This is where I really liked about Terry. He didn't come out and say, hey, he's going to be the next Sewell. He basically said, though, like, if he continues to work hard, he said he's the hardest working player in the group. He's there very early in the mornings, before everybody else. He's got the work ethic. He's got the physical attributes. And he's still got the ceiling and the potential to become as good of a player as Oregon's had, run through that group of the offensive line. I thought from a guy that's coached and recruited Penei Sewell to come out here and say that about Josh Connerly, a guy that we were talking like, what are we going to talk to Josh Connerly about ahead of time? Because he played last year, but he didn't really play a ton, and he had some moments, but do fans really care about a touchdown pass he caught at Colorado in November when it's April? He was very high and said that I think the craziest stat was, or the comment was, Erik Terry compared Josh Connerly's, I guess, footwork to that of a defensive back, and someone that's 6'6" and 300 pounds or whatever he is. He was very glowingly supportive of Josh Connerly, which he should be, but just the lengths that he went, I thought was pretty eye-popping.
The elevator pitch is Josh Connerly is a safety linebacker in terms of his athleticism and footwork with the power of an offensive lineman from Erik Terry. I think everybody's going to sign up for that. That sounds pretty good.
Yes.
And then when you bring up the fact that he's, according to Erik, also the hardest worker in the room, and the first guy there, the first guy to leave, or last guy to leave, I should say. And we should know he was like significantly the last person coming off I think he might have been like one of the last people to leave the practice field because he was certainly the last person we spoke to by a handful of minutes. But yeah, no, I think it's a player who, one of the school's highest rated recruits of all time, a player with a ton of anticipation and excitement. But, a year ago, I don't think it's his fault. Joins a group where there's a ton of returners, a lot of experienced guys. I think it's a lot to ask a teenager to come in and beat out the players who have NFL futures, who've already had 2 to 3 years starting and didn't play a huge role. So you don't really kind of know exactly what you've got there. I think everybody had heard positive things from what you'd seen in practice. And when it was on the field, it wasn't like it was a mess, but to hear some constructive, some positive kind of feedback on him from a new position coach, like I think it kind of stood out to me. I know one other thing that I think we should mention is kind of nugget Jared unrested, I guess, from Triquez about where he's working at positionally, just because I thought that was, I don't know, maybe not super interesting, but kind of notable that Triquez is still working at safety, even though I think we've all kind of got him. I have him in pen written in as a starting corner probably, but I mean, maybe I
Don't
should.
blame you.
Maybe I shouldn't.
Yeah, maybe we shouldn't. I don't know. We talked to Triquez. It was Jared Denny of On3 and I, and a little bit of Rob Mosley there. Triquez is a great guy, great dude. I misspoke and said that he was playing linebacker. He quickly corrected me and kind of laughed in my face. So that was a good time. But yeah, no, he's said that he's splitting a majority of his reps. It seemed like a 50-50 between cornerback and safety. This is not overly similar to last season because it felt like Triquez was strictly a safety during last spring ball, or at least that's where we saw him line up the most.
Sure.
Obviously, we do not get to watch all of practice. This year, he's lined up the most at cornerback or in cornerback-related positional drills, but he's allegedly playing both safety and cornerback. He has no problem doing either or. He says he prefers the positional flexibility or versatility, whatever you want to call it. Mostly because when he plans on going to the league, he'll have the option to say like, "Hey, I've done both at college and I've done both at a high level." We've never seen Triquez play safety on the football field during an actual game in a University of Oregon uniform. He's only played cornerback in 2021 and 2022. He's only played cornerback. He played over 700 reps at cornerback last season. My inclination is that this, my friends, is a cornerback. However, there's a part of me that I've talked about on this podcast many a times before. There's a part of me that believes that if he moves to safety, he could be the best safety on the team, bar none, not even close.
Really?
Yeah, because this is a 6'3", 200-pound cornerback who has over a 7-foot wingspan, who tracks, who covers well in man coverage. I know there's a couple people in the comment section who are going to say he stunk last year. Rewatch the tape. Outside of BYU, he was very good. Did not allow a touchdown in coverage over the final 5 games of the season, which included Oregon State, Washington, and Utah. This was a good cover corner last season for Oregon.
Yes.
But put that into a safety body. Ooh-wee. It's a guy who hits well, a guy who covers ground. So I'm all in. The only issue is that the same thing that Oregon has faced the last 3 seasons, where it's been a Triquez Bridges versus Dante Manning, who's going to start as we head into spring game. Oregon doesn't have another option here. And that's probably why Triquez Bridges is going to start at cornerback this season, unless Kyrie Jackson is the clear number 1 and Jaleel Florent or Dante Manning is comparable to how Triquez Bridges plays at cornerback, and then maybe Dan and company will move him to safety. But I don't see that happening, so my dreams of Triquez being the starting safety are probably DOA, dead on arrival. Would you guys like to hear who he picked as his basketball team?
Can we say? Oh yeah, let's hit that. I had a couple thoughts on this, but yeah, I'd actually love to hear who he has on his basketball team.
Go for the thoughts. We'll end the show on the basketball team.
Okay, yeah, because it's probably a little lighter. No, my thought here was like, Quez might be your best corner and your best safety. It probably is right now, and that's kind of a weird spot to be in. And my guess is they're really trying to weigh what the replacement level player is at those other spots right now. Of like, where are we going to have a bigger hole? If Quez plays corner, are we going to have are we okay at safety? If Quez plays safety, are we going to be okay at corner? And they're going to make some determination on that, obviously, in the future, but that they're kind of right now wanting to make sure he's ready to do either one, because they know he's right now pretty clearly their top corner, at least their top returner. Kyrie's been kind of in and out of practice, so it's hard to know what his development is. The other guys are young. I think you can kind of feel pretty comfortable saying he's your top corner right now. And safety, as Jared laid out, I don't have really anything to argue with. Like, he has all the traits. He has a background. He was a safety in high school in Alabama. I think the stat that everybody knows, he had the most, interceptions, or tied. When he finished his career, I don't know if anybody surpassed him, but the most interceptions in the state's history playing safety. So very much an accomplished player there.
Most pick sixes.
Was it most pick sixes? I thought it was. Was it both? Just pick sixes. Okay. I knew he's a storied player at that position. So it'll be very interesting to kind of see, I think, over the course of this spring and then going into fall, of kind of like what develops at the other positions and where do they end up putting them in. I'm with Jared that my guess, and I probably everybody else listening agrees, is like he'll probably end up at corner because that's where he's played, and he's played again, I think, at a pretty high level. But I think the door is cracked a little open for him to play at safety if the development at corner takes place around him. Like, hey, maybe both the Jaleels take a huge step, Kyrie takes a step, Dante Manning finally becomes the guy we thought he could be, and one or two of these 4-star, true freshman corners that are coming in, later, or I guess Cole Martin's case, who are already here, really develops and steps up, and you go, okay, actually we can cut him loose and let him play safety. But that seems like you're asking a lot of guys to take big steps forward, and that maybe it's too much to ask.
I mean, imagine a safety rotation to start the season of Tysheem Johnson at nickel, Evan Williams, and Triquez Bridges. Sounds pretty good to me.
I think the only comment I would have, I'm intrigued by Triquez playing safety. He was phenomenal at that in Alabama. I think he holds like the state record for interceptions or something in the state. Is that the right name, or is there another player?
No, yeah, we just went over this like 30 seconds ago.
That went right over my head.
It's all good. We just had this debate.
It's pick sixes.
Yeah, Jared corrected me. It's pick sixes. I thought I said 17
or something like that.
Yeah, I said the exact same thing, Matt, of like the most interceptions, and Jared said pick sixes. And then you said the same thing, and then that's why Jared was.
I think I got distracted because I was looking at the time and trying to figure out my editing time of when did we take the break, and I missed that entire conversation.
Okay.
That's already been said. That's embarrassing. All right. I think the only thing I would have with that though is, I don't think it happens. I think he's one of the better corners on the team, and I'm happy that Jared earlier said that people have this idea that he wasn't good last season, and maybe he wasn't good for one game, like the BYU game, which Jared referenced. But he's actually a good cornerback, and there's this notion that he's terrible, and that would be a very big move. And that would have to mean that your younger guys are significantly better than they were the year before, because he's one of, if not your best corner on the roster right now at April 14th.
Yeah. Hit me with the basketball team.
Basketball time?
Yeah, I want to hear it.
Yeah. If you're a new listener to the podcast, last season when there just wasn't enough questions to ask players or coaches, we would ask them who would be the best basketball team on the Oregon roster. And, we had heard some rumblings about who was really good, but, we would ask guys. So we've started this tradition again this season. I asked Triquez Bridges yesterday. First pick was himself. He said that he is a Magic Johnson type player, a facilitator, a guy who is just reliable, someone who can go get a bucket if they need him. Which, I'd have to see it. I'd like to see it.
Super humble too,
I just like I like the confidence.
Yeah, comparing yourself to like the 4th or 5th best player of all time in the NBA.
Well, I mean, I would call Dana, because again, 6'3" dude with a 7-foot wingspan. That would work on the basketball court too. Then he picked Kyrie Jackson as his second overall pick. Interesting one. He said Kyrie, and for a second in my brain, I'm like, Kyrie Irving, like, of course.
He's leaving Dallas. He's joining the Ducks.
Yeah, I'm like, of course.
That's not a trade the Ducks want to make.
And then I'm like, oh no, it's not. And he's like, I'm like, oh, Kyrie Jackson. That's right. There's 2 Kyries on this team. So that was a good pick. He said that just a good shooter. He's hooped with him many a times this offseason, so he's just a good player. Terrence Ferguson, who was a resounding pick from last year. I'm sure you guys remember him.
He's like unanimous almost.
Yeah, he was one of the best players on the team, allegedly. So he's going to be filling in that small forward for them. Big T Ferg at 6'6", and then Bo Nix as the starting point guard, which I thought was interesting.
There was a video of Bo Nix out there hooping it up with Ty Thompson on social media. They shared it like a week and a half ago.
Excellent.
Nice stroke.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what Bridges said. He said that he's a good shooter. Just don't let him dribble. So he's going to be the Seth Curry equivalent, not the Steph, the Seth Curry equivalent, the Fernand Korkmans.
And he's playing point guard apparently, according to the
And he can't dribble. We gotta ask Mo this question.
This might be an off-ball kind of guy. You
he's
know,
Steve Kerr, kind of spotting up in the corner, old school.
Right, exactly. He's like I don't know, whoever's playing off-ball with Luka Doncic because you're not going to get the basketball from him. Lastly, the center of the group, Mateo Uyunglele, which was a surprise choice. I think I brought this up either to Denny or to you guys afterwards, but no one has picked Josh Connerly Jr. to be.
I was just going to bring this up,
and
he has a scholarship offer from Oregon to play at Oregon. Basketball. I mean, it was to help entice him to get here.
It was a promotional thing, right? But yes. He was still a good basketball player. Don't get me wrong. But yeah, he went with Mateo because he's he was really, really, really athletic, is what he kept telling me. And he's someone who he doesn't know if he's any good at basketball, but he wants him on the court because he's probably going to be faster and stronger and jump higher than everybody else. So I thought that was interesting. But again, the no Connerly thing, I don't understand.
Connerly was like all league in the toughest part.
A good league in Seattle.
Like it's like he was like one of the better players on a state champion team. It's like, we don't want him. I love it.
He was good. He was genuinely good, and he's good footwork. Could probably still play basketball if he wanted to. I don't get it.
Can't dunk, though. He said he can't dunk now because of his height or because of his weight.
He said he wasn't sure. We need to make sure.
I'm okay with him not trying to dunk.
I think that's cool. I'm all right with that. And I'll also say I was a little bit like, I know you mentioned it sounds like Bo and Ty are getting some hoops in. Josh did say you might see him at the rec every now and then. Is that I don't want to go on this tangent. Are we excited by the prospect of like Josh Connerly maybe going in for a dunk in a rec league game and smashing into somebody and hurting himself? I just kind of was like, I don't really want to think about that, but at the same time, I understand. Let's let them have fun and play basketball. But I don't know, just like it would be bad.
No, I want to see a full on game here. I want.
Okay. It's setting up that way.
In June, when that 2-week period when they're not in school and they're not training or anything, give me a 5-on-5 run at the rec league. I mean, Josh even said, "You'll find me at the rec league if you want to play me. Find me."
Yeah,
I'd be down. We gotta get Dan to okay it.
It could be hard. That might be tough.
It'll be very difficult. I mean, remember when Willie Taggart came out during like a halftime show at a basketball game and they all played basketball?
Absolutely atrocious.
That was. I mean, nobody was good on that court, but the thought of somebody jumping and tearing something was well within my mind at that point.
Wasn't that when Justin Herbert like swatted the crap out of Willie, or was it a different? Was that Mario?
I think it was Patrick.
I thought it was Justin who blocked one of the coaches. I'm sorry, maybe I'm misrepresenting it. I was there and I remember being like, "Oh wow!" Like that.
Well, I remember Herbert doing something, but I would be shocked if
Herbert
Taggart threw the franchise out on the basketball court, like Jared said. But then Taggart made a bunch of stupid decisions.
So I was going to say, you'd be surprised. Like, you'd be surprised with him putting his quarterback in a position to get hurt. Did you not remember what happened that season?
It was the precursor. We all should have known.
Yeah. Anyway, we've gone way too much on this. Probably, I don't know. That's fun.
I don't know. I could do a full. We need to ask this more often. We can do a full episode.
I think we need like a spreadsheet with all of the starting fives, and we do some sort of like all NBA the equivalent of an all NBA team of like the all Oregon team. Like, attach some votes, some scores, and we'll come together.
I should do like a feature piece on this. Really get into the grind of who's going to be the starting five.
Get in on it. I like it.
Yeah.
All right, that's gonna do it for us here on this edition of the Odds and Audibles podcast. Hopefully, you guys enjoyed the show, especially the end. We embarrassed ourselves, or I embarrassed myself. We talked basketball on a football podcast about football players playing basketball. And hopefully you guys left more informed than when you arrived. Maybe not. And if you didn't, maybe it was entertaining. Who cares? Until the next one, which will be on Monday after Oregon's spring scrimmage, their first spring scrimmage of the year. A Dan Lanning interview will happen on Saturday. We'll have plenty to talk about on that Monday podcast. Plus, maybe a mailbag. I don't know. We'll see. We may do both. We may mix it up because of Dan Lanning speaking and scrimmage, whatnot. What have you? We'll figure it out. Until then, though, you've been listening to the Odds and Audibles podcast.
Talk to you later, folks.
Peace.